Good morning, Burwood Church. This is Pastor Ryan, and I've been invited this morning to share the word with you in the sermon series you guys have been walking through, Just Jesus. And I've tuned in to a few of the messages, and I've been blessed by listening to them. I've heard Pastor Fraser and Josh Stothers, most recently Murray Hunter, and I think, friends, there's no better way to go through this season of lockdown than to center ourselves on the pure and simple message of Jesus. I really think we have a great opportunity come post-COVID-19 lockdown, when we come to the new normal, to actually relaunch ourselves and to ask ourselves the questions, what can we do that we wished we had done before? And I think grounding yourselves in the message of Jesus is a perfect base, a perfect platform to ask yourselves that question. Just a little bit about myself. Many of you would know me. I've preached at Burwood before, but I am happily married to my beautiful wife, Emma, and we have two little boys. That's two little boys. We've got our eldest son, Harrison, aka Harry, and my youngest boy just turned 1. His name is Maxim. It's a French name, but we call him Max, or usually we call him Maxi. And lockdown with 2 children under the age of 3 has been a lot of fun. Don't read any sarcasm into that. But friends, it's good to be with you. I'm going to pray as we invite God into this space, and as I share a word with you, I just want to pray that He'll speak through me, and that on the other end of this camera, on your TV screens or your laptops or your phone, that the Spirit will be wherever you are and help you process this message. So bow your heads with me wherever you are. Father in heaven, Lord, it's so good to be able to share a word with the Burwood family and all the friends and who are visiting with us this morning. I just want to pray that you will speak through me as I share about these 2 parables, these 2 stories that Jesus spoke 2,000 years ago. And Father, I just want to pray in the hearing of these parables, may we be stirred to action. May you stir our hearts to reflect on our current realities and to be willing enough to boldly step into a space of sacrifice as we adopt the changes I believe Jesus is inviting us to make in our lives. So bless us to this end is my prayer on behalf of everybody listening right now, in the name of Jesus. Amen. Alrighty, so let's get into it. This week, I'm going to be sharing to you from Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 to 35. So if you have your Bibles at home or a device, feel free to open there, because that's where we're going to be parked primarily for the most part this morning. And I wanted to just read this text in its entirety for us to get a lay of the land. Beyond that, what we're going to do is we're just going to look at Jesus's understanding of parable. And I know you did that last week with Murray Hunter. We're just going to take it a little bit further from where he left off. And then we're going to break down these 2 parables and look at their implication for our lives today. So let's have a read of Matthew 13, verse 31 to 35. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. So it says, "Here's another illustration Jesus used. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed planted in a field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but it becomes the largest of garden plants. It grows into a tree, and birds come and make nests in its branches." Jesus also used this illustration. The kingdom of heaven is like the yeast a woman used in making bread. Even though she put only a little yeast in 3 measures of flour, it permeated every part of the dough. Jesus always used stories and illustrations like these when speaking to the crowds. In fact, he never spoke to them without using parables. This fulfilled what God had spoken through the prophet. "I will speak to you in parables. I will explain things hidden since the creation of the world." So that's where we'll be diving into this morning. And you know, friends, I was asked to share on the topic of Jesus's kingdom is consuming. And sort of by way of introduction, I wanted to ask this important question. Has Jesus' kingdom been consuming in your life? Has Jesus' kingdom so taken over every aspect of what you do on a day-to-day basis? In the life of not just yourself, but your family, the life of your church. Has Jesus' kingdom so taken over not just Burwood Church, but has it taken over the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Victoria, the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Australia, even the church of all the churches of every other denomination you can think of? Has Jesus' kingdom had that kind of impact? This is a really important question because, I'm going to start on a bit of a downer, but I really believe, friends, just by way of broadly categorizing, I'm saying broadly, not everybody applies here, but I don't think the Western church, by and large, has allowed Jesus' kingdom to fully consume it. And why do I say this? I'm a young pastor. A lot of my friends, colleagues are also ministers. Fraser, who's your new pastor, how exciting for that, woot woot, is a new pastor. And, we often shoot the breeze, pastors. I find teachers like to hang out with teachers and nurses like to hang out with nurses. Pastors love to hang out with pastors, and we love to talk shop. We love to talk about what's happening in our churches, what's happening in our communities. And friends, one of the things I've noticed in recent times is that the church loves to engage business principles. The church loves to engage self-help principles. And I am a firm person who buys into all of that stuff. I listen to all the podcasts. I listen to all the leadership books. I attend, these online webinars. I do it all. And friends, I really believe that so much of this kind of self-help Christianity has permeated what we do as a church that the kingdom and the kingdom values have sort of been pushed to one side. And we've sort of taken this approach, if only we have the right idea, the right philosophy, the right understanding of things, then if we apply them in our context, then everything will work. But when I actually look at Jesus and what he has to say about the kingdom, I find a very different reality. I find a kingdom, a church that is based in faith, following where Jesus is leading, doing things that are so contrary to the ways of political systems. And so, friends, has Jesus' kingdom been all-consuming in your life? The parables we're going to look at this idea of growth. Look at this idea of the kingdom expanding from something small and insignificant into something huge and amazing. And friends, I really believe, this is the sermon in a nutshell. I really believe that when we lean into what Jesus taught about the kingdom, when we so fully incorporate it into our lives, into our churches, we will see an impact in the world that the church hasn't seen for decades. So let's jump into it. Let's see how this is going to take place. I'm going to actually start at the end of our passage and then jump back to the parables being taught. In verse 34 of our passage that I just read to you, we actually see that Jesus refused to teach the crowds in any other way except through parables. And Murray Hunter did a brilliant job of unpacking why he did that. But I'm going to read to you verse 34. It says, Jesus always used stories and illustrations like these when speaking to the crowds. In fact, he never spoke to them without using parables. And that little detail actually caught my attention because it had slipped my mind. I knew Jesus used parables, but here Matthew says he never taught without parables. That was his primary mode of teaching. That was his main form of pedagogy for all of you teachers out there, was to take examples from the everyday world and bring them to the people's attentions. And Murray made this really good point, and I really want to revisit it because it's so important. Jesus takes us from the known, the things we know, and he moves us into the unknown. That's what he does with parables. In other words, he does what we like to say today as scaffolding. We have a base and he likes to build on from that base. Matthew 35 goes on and we are quoted from scripture by a guy named Asaph. We're not told it's from a guy called Asaph, but I'm telling you that it's from a guy called Asaph that Matthew quotes. It says, "This fulfilled what God had spoken through the prophet. I will speak to you in parables. I will explain things hidden since the creation of the world." In 1 Chronicles 25, we are introduced to Asaph. We're not told a whole lot about him. We're not going to go there, but I know you guys break down the message afterwards, so I encourage you to have a look at 1 Chronicles 25. Asaph is one of a small handful of people that David handpicks to serve in the temple that is going to be constructed by his son Solomon. David's not able to do it for one reason or another. The Bible states that. We're not going into that. But he wants to do everything he can to prepare his son to build this amazing place of worship. And Asaph is one of the people who is selected, and he is selected because he loves music. He's a member of Burwood Church. He loves good music. And you know what's also crazy? You actually see that Asaph loves music so much so, and all of his other contemporaries in 1 Chronicles 25, all these men train their family to just engage with music. These are all Von Trapp families. And David handpicks these families to facilitate worship in the temple. I think it's absolutely incredible. And I think there's a little point here to be made. It's not the point of the sermon, but there is a point here, and that is church members, if you have children, get them into music. It's one of the best things you can do for your community in the long term. Many of you will know that I originally worked at Dandenong Polish, and one of the best things about working there was to see that all of this investment that parents had put into their kids, you will learn the piano, you will learn the guitar, you will learn the violin. It's paid off with massive dividends because now you've got this beautiful music culture, this beautiful music scene. And friends, I just have to encourage you to do it. My two kids, I'm already talking to my wife. What are they going to play? How are we going to make this happen? Friends, it's one of the best things you can do. But Asaph is a musical man. And the psalm that he is quoted from is actually in Psalm 78. And if you want to have a look at that, I'd encourage you to go there as well after the sermon and have a look at some of the things Asaph talks about. But in Psalm 78, verses 2 to 3, we actually get the specific reference that Matthew makes reference to. He says, "For I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from our past, stories we have heard and known, stories our ancestors handed down to us." In this psalm, Asaph is saying God, Jesus, is going to use parables to remind us of what he has done throughout history. And he wants us to see that there is this narrative to Scripture, and so many of us know the stories of Adam and Eve, of Abraham, of his 12 great-grandsons. We know the story of Moses, but there is some deeper meaning behind these stories. In verse 7 to 8, he says, "So each generation should set its hope anew on God, not forgetting his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. Then they will not be like their ancestors, stubborn, rebellious, unfaithful, refusing to give their hearts to God." Asaph is hoping that by engaging in the stories of their past, that the children of Israel, this current generation who is listening to this in the time of David, would learn the lessons from the past. And you get this sense that he feels that up until now, that hasn't happened effectively well. And you've got to remember, before Asaph and David, we're in the time of Saul, and before that, we're in the time of the Judges, one of the saddest times in Israel's history. And friends, Asaph is reflecting on the fact that his people forgot what God had done. They had all these stories, but the meaning and significance of what had taken place had sort of escaped them. And so Jesus uses his parables in a similar way. Jesus wants you to recognize that there is going to be meaning and interpretation that are needed to understand what he's going to say. And you can be like the children of Israel. Are you going to engage or are you not going to engage? Murray put it this way last week. The parable is so often dependent on the hearer. How are you going to engage with God's message? How are you going to engage with these stories? I know for a fact that all of you who are listening have at one time or another read a parable and been like, I have no idea what he's talking about. Jesus only a handful of times explains his parables, but the vast majority he doesn't unpack. And he leaves it up to you to decide, am I going to take the time, the patience, the energy to really dig and try and understand what this means and what he wants for my life? This is so important, and it's almost Jesus's way of saying, hey, friends, I'm starting something big. I'm starting a new movement. It's going to transcend the nation of Israel. It's going to transcend the Roman Empire. And to get this thing rolling, I need only the most serious of people. And Jesus puts this great little thing in by telling parables to weed out those who are serious and those who are not. So friends, are you serious about this? Are you the type of person who's going to be proactive and dig for yourself and trying to ask Jesus, what are you trying to say to me? Or are you just going to rely on the pastor, on the Sabbath school leader, on the small group leader, week after week to feed you? This is the challenge that Jesus is making today to all of us. So Jesus shares these parables. And there are two parables, and both of them are about the kingdom. And I need to say this, I really need to go a slight deviation here. But friends, the Gospels is not about heaven versus hell. The gospel at the end of the day is primarily about this kingdom and how you interact with it. And so friends, when we understand that, I think it just changes our whole approach to engaging with the gospels. So let's have a look at Matthew 13, verse 31. And here we have our first parable, the parable of the mustard seed. Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed planted in a field. It is the smallest of all seeds, and many of you have cooked with them. You've seen them. They are tiny. I love to use mustard in my curries. It is a tiny seed, but it becomes the largest of garden plants. It grows into a tree, and birds come and make nests in its branches. This tiny little thing can grow into one of the largest of trees. And, as I was preparing for this and I was reading a little bit about the first century, people wouldn't willy-nilly just throw a mustard seed into the ground in hopes that it would sprout something. Because they knew to do so would be to invite this giant thing in your backyard, and who knows if you have enough space for a tree that size. And so what is Jesus trying to do here? What's he trying to say about this mustard seed, this kingdom? What is its application for us today? Well, friends, what I think he's trying to say is that his kingdom is going to have a small start. It's going to have the smallest of starts. So many of his followers were hoping that his movement was going to start with a big bang, a big explosion. There was going to be Romans falling left, right, and center. It was going to be this all-impressive, crazy charge. And Jesus is saying, whoa, 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 hold your horses. And through this parable, Jesus subverts his hearers' expectations of what the kingdom is all about. This movement is going to have a small beginning. Don't think in terms of large if you think you need to be successful, Burwood Church. You don't need to start with a massive budget. You don't need to start with all of the bells and whistles, all your ducks lined in a row to have success for the kingdom of heaven. Right now, we're in this crazy time in history. Whilst I'm recording this, America still hasn't got a president. And maybe by the time this airs, they will have one. The interesting thing is, I've been following this quite closely. I find it very fascinating, this whole debacle. But do you know that the Democrat Party have spent the second largest budget in history for the senator race? That's the upper house, not the lower house. And according to my research, they have spent $185 million to secure seats in the Senate. The crazy thing about all of this, you would think $185 million could secure some seats in the Senate. But here's what's happened. the Democrats have actually gone backwards in the Senate. And it's just quite a fascinating thing to see, because I really would have thought if you throw $185 million with ad campaigns, flyers, leaflets, door knockers, all of that sort of stuff at a cause, it would make a difference. But it hasn't had the impact they have thought. And quite a few commentators are like, that's the biggest waste of $185 million. And friends, it just goes to tell you that you don't need huge things to have a big impact for the kingdom of heaven. You don't need a big budget. You don't need all the bells and whistles, like I said before. You just need a small amount. You just need the kingdom values working in your life. So friends, what does it look like at Burwood Church? What have you guys done with this little mustard seed? We are told when it starts to grow, it will produce a tree, and all of the branches will be filled with birds of various kinds. And this would have been confronting to the Jewish hearers, because the Old Testament has this sort of way of describing birds in trees as the Gentiles. We see this in Daniel and other parts of the Old Testament. But Jesus is saying when this kingdom grows, it's going to attract people to it that look completely different to you. The people who come to my kingdom are not all going to be Jewish. In fact, the majority of them are not going to look Jewish. And so Burwood Church, as you brace yourself, as you poise yourself to grow in kingdom values, have you come to terms that your church may not look like the church it is today? You know, what I find so interesting about church, and this is my observation from every church I've worked at and every church I've been in over my 34-year life, and that is we want the church to grow with people who look and talk and breathe and smell and do the things we do. But the reality is Jesus is saying there are going to be birds coming from all over the place to join in my kingdom. And the question is, are you prepared for that? And if I was to answer the question honestly about the kind of church I'd love to have an upper middle class church with a lovely big tithe reversion. And we can build a lovely big facility. But the reality is I live in Dandenong. And when I go walk through Dandenong, the people of Dandenong look nothing like the people I'd love to have in my ideal church. Who has Jesus surrounded you with? What does your neighborhood look like? Are these people the same as you or different? Jesus is challenging you to wrestle with this tension today. The second parable is the parable of yeast. And let's have a read of this in verse 33 of Matthew 13. Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like the yeast a woman used in making bread. Even though she put only a little yeast in 3 measures of flour, it permeated every part of the dough. Being the person I am, I dug into this text. I'm like, where would they get yeast? It's not like they would have gone down to the supermarket, buy a little instant sachet packet that you mix in hot water and pour into your dough batch. We're talking about, friends, some good old sourdough starter. And I know some of you in lockdown have been making those sourdough loaves. This is what Jesus is talking about. The people of that day would have made a little, dough starter, and they would have incorporated into the whole bread. Now, that's not the most incredible thing about this text. This is what's incredible. I've never seen this. I've read the Bible many times, but I've missed this detail. Jesus says that a little bit of yeast is put into 3 measures of flour. I'm like, oh yeah, we're talking about 3 cups, maybe 3 bags. No. We are talking about 39 kilos of flour. 39 kilos of flour. Jesus is saying a little bit of yeast can incorporate into 39 kilos of flour. That's enough flour for a whole village, for a whole community. Friends, the kingdom of heaven, when you incorporate it into your life, it will impact everyone. It's not a question of if, it's not a question of maybe, but it will engage everybody. And so I asked the question at the beginning, has the kingdom, powerfully affected all of us? Has the kingdom, been all-consuming in our lives? And I think if we're honest with each other, it hasn't had that kind of impact. And friends, it just leads me to think that maybe we haven't been engaging with Christ's kingdom principles the way we should have. So friends, we need to get on board the kingdom train and start digging in, start leaning into all of the things Jesus said, because it's not a question of if, like I said, but when. This is going to happen. That you guys are going to have an impact far deeper than you realize. Lately, I've been reading a story about a guy, true story in history. Some of you guys might have heard of this guy, but there's a guy in English history in the 1800s by the name of George Muller. George Muller is a German, and he grows up, he's in a Christian family, but he's a bit naughty. He steals money from his dad, and his dad says, you know what? I'm gonna sort you out, so I'm gonna send you to seminary. All right, I don't advise that, parents out there. If your kids are playing up, don't send them to Avondale. That's probably not the best thing to do. But he sends him to seminary, and the kid's smart, he's learning, but it's all up here, but it's not down here. Eventually, one day, this guy, George, one of his friends invites him to small group. And at small group, there isn't a pastor to do a Bible study, so they read a sermon. And it's in hearing this sermon which talks about the love of Jesus and what he came to do for sinners. He came to express grace and to give them this free gift of eternal life, to invite them into the kingdom. And this message, for some reason, on this particular day, touches George Muller's heart. And from that point onwards, it changes the trajectory of his life. And he literally, I'm not exaggerating this, becomes a person of faith. He decides that, Jesus needs people to represent the orphans in England. He eventually moves there. He marries a beautiful woman, and he feels a call on his heart to plant this orphanage. And, in doing all of this, he goes, you know what? As I read my Bible, I see all of the disciples and the apostles, they were living in faith. They didn't have a salary. I'm not going to have a salary. So he refuses to take a salary, and he basically starts this orphanage for hundreds and thousands of children. And I kid you not when I say this, friends, that there is not one meal, there is not one part of that building that was not prayed for. This guy never took a salary. He never took a wage. He survived on donations for his whole life. And when you read his story, you see this guy who just lived and breathed faith. And friends, I just feel like the impact of his church was it was powerful. People started to hear about what was going on. He starts a Bible school, and this part of England, Bristol, starts to explode with the gospel of the kingdom. And friends, I so believe Burwood Church can have the same impact in the city of Melbourne today. God is wanting to use you just like a sourdough starter, and you guys can permeate all of the eastern suburbs, Melbourne, in fact. But we have to lean into the values of the kingdom. One of my favorite verses is from the book of Zechariah, and it's from chapter 4 and verse 10. And if you need to memorize this verse because it's amazing. This is what Zechariah 4 verse 10 says. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin, to see the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand. This is about, rebuilding Jerusalem, this text. And, Zechariah, he's just feeling a bit down. It's really slow. The work doesn't seem like it's making much of an impact. And he is told, hey, don't despise your small beginnings. Burwood Church, you may not be a particularly large church when we look at the landscape of Christian churches, but I guarantee you this. Do not despise your small beginnings. Lean into the gospel. Lean into the kingdom and its principles, and you will see a result that no other church is seeing in Melbourne today. So let's wrap this bad boy up. Jesus is telling us today, friends, small is king. Small is supreme. It doesn't matter how big your budget, how big your church, all of the facilities you have. If you start with the kingdom principles, as small as they may seem, of being loving, of being kind, you will have a head start over every other church out there today. I wasn't sure if I was going to share this, but I have to share this for you. But there is this television show my wife and I have been watching, and we absolutely love it. It's called Ted Lasso. It's on Apple Plus. You've got to watch it. But it's this fish out of water story. It's about this American football coach, and he is invited on a whim to go coach an English Premier League football team All of the pundits, all of the journalists, all of the supporters believe he is going to fail miserably. But what they don't know about this guy, Ted Lasso, is that his whole goal as a coach is to grow people who are loving, who are kind, who are considerate. And it's no spoiler to tell you, but the television show basically tracks his progress on turning this whole team, this whole community around through beautiful principles of love and kindness. And my wife and I watched this thing, we binged it because it was so good. We're like, that's what the church is meant to be. And you can see just this small man, everybody writes it off, but by the end of the show, he has this whole community in the palm of his hands. They love him, they love what he's doing. Yes, he's American. Yes, he's crazy. Yes, he doesn't know anything about football. He doesn't know what an offside rule is. Come on, man. But they just eat out of the palm of his hands. And you see this slow journey of the transformational power of love. Burwood Church, this is what Jesus is inviting you today. This church with small beginnings, it was so small when Jesus resurrects, all of his believers who are left can gather in one upper room. That small beginning, that small community, though, friends, 4 centuries later has taken over the Roman Empire. So much so, Constantine makes Christianity the official religion. Small beginnings, humble beginnings, kingdom principles. This is your story. This is the story that God wants for Burwood Church today. The only thing you need to do, friends, is to lean into his kingdom principles, to lean into the values that he has left for us in this great book we call the Bible. Burwood Church, I want you to bow your heads wherever you are right now, and I want to pray over you that you would be a church through this season that falls so deeply in love with Jesus and his kingdom and its values and what it's all about. So bow your heads with me as I just pray for this experience over your church right now. Father in heaven, Lord, I just want to pray for Burwood Church. It is a special church. It's a church that gives people a go. It's a church that wants to be out on the edges, to experiment in the margins. And Father, I believe it's a church you've called into existence and it has a purpose. But that purpose will only be realized, Father, as they continue to lean into Jesus, as they continue to lean into his principles, his values. And so my prayer, Father, is beyond this sermon series that each and every single member of Burwood Church can have a personal relationship with you, that they could continue to nurture that little mustard seed, that they could continue to nurture that sourdough starter, because you got to nurture a sourdough starter. But Father, my prayer is that the results of these efforts to do something so seemingly insignificant, Father, I pray that they will come to see in faith the amazing impact it can have on their community and even the wider community of Melbourne. Bless them to this end, Father. They are a church with plans. They are a church on fire. They have a new pastor. They have new pastors. It's going to be an incredible 2021. But I just want to pray, Father, that they will do their part by leaning in to Jesus. I pray this prayer in Jesus' name, and let the church say amen. Church, it's been great sharing with you. I'm getting hot in here. It's supposed to be 20-something degrees, but it's been so good. I can't wait to see you in person one day, but until then, God bless, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.